Welcome to Rates and Barrels. Derek VanRiper here with Eno Sarris. We are back. We've been together for the better part of the last 4 days, and we've recorded 0 episodes together, which is pretty unusual for us. But the good news is, and you know this already if you're watching on YouTube, Spring Eno has made his triumphant return to the show.
That's right. I'm here from spring training right now in Mariners camp, and I think the thing that makes this spring unique versus other springs is the WBC. Everyone's talking about it, everyone's looking at it, and all sorts of camps are losing tons of players. Today, the Mariners lost Julio Rodriguez to the competition there. That allows some young players to get more opportunity. Tito Francona yesterday in Reds camp was talking about how that's kind of a fun part of the job in spring. You know, the first part of the job is the first 3-4 innings. We talked about Trevor May, where the veterans are in, they got to get their reps in. But he said it's also fun when you get to see, you know, one of your top prospects take over shortstop for the last 3-4 innings, you know. And so there's going to be a little bit more of that. If you're traveling to spring or you're just watching on TV, this is going to be the chance to see some guys. I just saw a story about how like the entire Red Sox outfield is gone for the WBC. I also wonder just how that fits hand in glove with making evaluations. I think there's a net positives and negatives. So, you know, if you're on the bubble and you're somebody, maybe like Hae-Seong Kim is in a roster battle maybe for the second base job with the Tommy Edman out in LA. You know, it's bad that you're away from the Dodgers, who are going to make this decision about whether or not you're the starting second baseman. Maybe. But you're also in high leverage, high import, you know, big moments that, you know, Dodgers brass is watching anyway, you know, and you're facing the best, you know, pitching that, you know, maybe not the very best. Maybe some of them won't be the very best. But if you know, his team advances to a certain degree, I mean, they'll be facing Japanese pitchers. They'll be facing really good pitchers. So there's still going to be some good evaluation there. And in some ways, maybe better evaluation. Like they have more high stakes. Okay, this guy's ready to be the everyday guy at second base for a while. So I think it was positives and negatives. But, you know, for support staff, for team staff, for evaluation purposes, I think if you ask them deep down inside, they'd much rather it was a normal spring training without WBC. They had everybody in place and they could do everything the way they want to do it.
Yeah. I think as far as it being a significant detriment, like I don't think it meets that threshold. If it was, then I don't think we'd have this tournament happening this time of year. I think over time there's been, at least from the outside looking in, a greater embrace of the tournament. I'm sure there are still executives, coaches, people inside the game that are just kind of holding their breath.
Executives,
yeah, the insurance policies keep getting
arms.
Yeah, those policies keep getting more and more expensive. We talked about that a little bit on the World Baseball Classic preview episode that I recorded with Steven Nesbitt, and part of that was the byproduct of a couple of major injuries that happened in 2023 during the tournament, right? So as things like that happen, the cost of participation, the cost of having insurance to participate keeps going up. But I think it opens the door for other guys to get more reps, though, for job battle guys to get more opportunities to play, more plate appearances, maybe sometimes an extra opportunity to play a spot they ordinarily wouldn't get to play defensively. Like that seems like a little bit of an opportunity depending on the shape of your roster in any given spring where the WBC is happening.
Hopefully it'll work out well for me. I had AL labor this weekend, and basically I didn't need it for my strategy going in, but I bought a lot of, you know, in auction parlance, sort of $3 to $6 young guys that have not been regulars yet that I think will become regulars this year. I got Marcelo Myers, Cam Smith, Parker Meadows, and Cole Young, all for that sort of $3 to $5 level. I think there'll be great bargains. There is the risk that one of them goes down. And so it was nice to talk to Cole Young today and just feel like this guy's not that nervous. He's like, I do what I do, and hopefully it's good enough, you know? And it felt like, you know, I think he's still basically the incumbent, a favorite. I think he's the favorite in second.
That seemed like the series of decisions that they made over the course of the offseason was to leave that depth chart in a state where it was really his job to lose. I saw him homer, I think it was on Sunday. All the days run together. That's my one spring training random note for anybody. It doesn't matter if you're in Arizona or Florida. Every day feels the exact same because the weather is really similar. The routine is very similar. And it's a little bit like being in a Vegas casino. You can just lose all track of time when you're out at spring training. But you ask Cole Young.
If I'm lucky, then, all these guys that, they are not going to the WBC. Marcelo Meyer's on my team too. So if these guys are not going to the WBC, they're getting more at-bats, like you're saying. They're getting more chance to shine in front of their evaluators. So if I'm lucky, that's what happens. But, I also I went to Reds camp and I talked to Spencer Steer, who's on the sort of a slightly different part of that where, he's being evaluated, but he's a veteran and, his role is up in the air, not his roster spot, and, there might be a little bit of a level of annoyance. Like, I thought I proved myself and now I have to keep proving myself. I think to some extent, baseball players are like, you just have to keep proving yourself. That's the game. But we talked to Tito about Spencer. I talked to Spencer himself about it. And it looks like he's taking reps at first and second and the outfield. So from a fantasy standpoint, it might be fun to have 3 different positions that he has eligibility at. But, you're also reading between the lines and being like, is he going to be a regular at any of these one spots? Is he going to get to 600 plate appearances? I'm still holding on to a little bit of optimism that he's the most complete hitter between him and J.J. Bleday and there's a Dane Myers and like all these like other outfielder types. So I do think he'll take over left field. And also, they said he'd finish games at first. So there might be an extra, at bat there. And I don't know when the use is for him, these cases for him being at second, but if he comes out of this with 600 plate appearances and 3 eligibilities, he will still be worth the investment you put in him so far, I think.
Especially if he's healthier. I mean, that's the key. I think Spencer Steer is the kind of guy that I think played through a lot of injuries last year. It's not necessarily reflected in the overall total of plate appearances. 568 was down from 656 and 665 the previous 2 seasons, but he still played 146 games. Just didn't look like the same guy. Walk rate came down a little bit. K rate came up a little. The quality of what we were getting, like the speed went away a little bit. 7 steals, I think, a year ago. And we've seen what I think is maybe like a 2020 profile from him. It was a 20 homer, 25 steal season with only 3 caught stealing in 2024. So there's a lot of ways he can bounce back. I think this would fall under the good versatility umbrella because there is one spot where he looks like the best guy, and there are other spots where if there's an injury, he's the first guy up to replace them, and then maybe they go platoon in left field. If Matt McClain's on the IL, maybe they shift things around in a way where Steer's playing somewhere else on the infield, and they're using someone else in the outfield, and like his versatility just keeps him in the lineup somewhere.
Yeah, Tito talked about, if he can play all 3 of those positions, then we can maybe carry an extra bat, maybe because, he's our extra infield. We count him as our extra infielder, and then we can take more outfielders on the bench. And I think this might be important for a slightly different reason. I know there's a note at the top of Noel V. Marte's page that says that he's getting looked at in center. But I have to say, I know it was just one game, but there was a weird we had Tito in the morning, right? And somebody asked in the Tito scrum, what's going on with Noelvi in the outfield? And Tito had to admit that he'd, miffed 2 or 3 plays already. And then we go to the game that day, and Noelvi miffs 2 balls, himself. Plus, Will Benson dropped a ball. Their outfield defense looked so bad, and they kept calling them hits, that to the point where somebody in the press box goes, they can't all be hits. But none of them look like hits to me. So I don't know if you're looking through the box score, you might be missing that Noelvi Marte's defense in outfield looks really bad.
One thing we really should have done was taken some fly balls in an Arizona outfield while we were out there. That would have been
Yeah,
great
maybe
content.
the high sun maybe it is difficult.
It's really difficult. I mean, Mike Cameron was on the Mariners broadcast that I was watching on Sunday, the one where Cole Young hit the homer, and he was just talking about how there's no depth perception. It's just blue, and it just goes on forever.
There's no clouds, so it's like it's a big old sky. I could see it. But it, when Benson did it too, and it was like 3 balls in 1 inning, you might look at the box score and say Brady Singer sucked that day, but I think actually the defense was his problem. So I don't know if he needs to be giving up deep fly balls a lot, but those all were outs in my book. And so, that makes it better to have JJ Bleday, even if he's not starting every day. Maybe he's finishing for Marte in the outfield. Maybe there is a little bit of plate appearance risk for Marte. But the big story in Reds camp is really how great that rotation looks. With Hunter, I have them as having the second best stuff plus in big leagues in the rotation. I talked to different guys about that, and Burns was super excited to hear that I have 4 guys projected for a sub-3 ERA as a starter. Skeens, Skubal, and Crochet and him. He's like, let's go. And he was talking about just getting used to the kick change and, not so much like changing the shape or anything, but just becoming more comfortable with it so he can use it more. Playing around the sinker, just trying to have a bigger arsenal. He said that when you're in the minors, you kind of develop all these pitches and try to push them to the best stuff. And then you get to the majors, you realize outs are the key. And you also want to prove you want to stay. So, you're like, I'm not throwing my third best pitch right now, dude. Like I need to prove I'm in the major leagues. I'm just going to be throwing fastball slider, But now that he feels a little bit more comfortable in his ability to stay, I know I've seen enlisted as being in a roster battle or a position battle for the 5th starter spot there, and I just don't see it at all. Like, I think Chase Burns is one of the best pitchers in baseball already. Like, I don't know if that's a crazy thing to say. Maybe rein it in a little bit, but he just reminds me so much of a young Spencer Strider that and a young Hunter Green that I just feel like you got to bet on the stuff. That Rhett Lauder, he was comparing himself to Brady Singer, and so it's like, you had this natural ability to take a guy that was hurt last year, but had massive oblique tear that required surgery, and say like, okay, let's just get you right. And then, you could eventually be the Brady Singer replacer. So I think Rhett Lauder is a great 6th starter to have, and I'd be excited to have him as depth, but I don't think he needs to go north of the can with the team.
Did you get the starters talking about each other and the things that they, would like to take from the other's arsenal or anything along those lines?
I did.
I think that's like the fun part of spring is when you're like, hey, which of your teammates looks really good right now?
It is funny because I did that both in Reds camp and in Mariners camp. And at Reds camp, they were like, the problem is we're all different, Lodolo was like, I'm a low slot lefty. I can talk to Abbott. Like, if Abbott says the high fastball is working against this guy, then I know that maybe I have a chance of my high fastball. But, we're not necessarily giving each other grips because our pitches are just so different, And, Barons was like, yeah, me and Hunter have some similarities. We're both power guys, but our slots are pretty different. Rhett was the one guy who's like, well, I've got a little bit in common with Brady Singer. And somebody else, Lodolo, said that too. So, Rhett's in camp learning from Singer. And, you take what you get, but your slot determines a lot of like how much you can take from other guys. Like, you can't necessarily just, if you're, down here and somebody's up there, like, the ball just comes out. The physics of it are so different. But I talked to, the Mariners about it, and the Mariners rotation, they're so legendary in terms of they learn so much from each other. So, if you're looking right now, you might be able to see, this is Logan Gilbert's splitter. And so Logan Gilbert, I was like, you guys were all kind of sweeper guys in the minors. You come to the majors, now you're all splitter guys. Like, what happened? How did that happen? Gilbert says after his sophomore year in the big leagues, he went to Driveline and learned the splitter there from Bill Hazel, who's now the pitching coach for the Marlins. And he came back, and that year, Bryce Miller was his first year in the majors. So he was like, I'm not adding a splitter my first year, but he watched Gilbert doing it. and they talk all the time, and he's playing around with that at the locker. He comes back the next year. The splitter is now his best secondary pitch, and Kirby, they are always like, yeah, that guy sets us up long. They were like, he just saw it, put it in his hand, and now has an elite splitter. So yeah, they love Kirby, and so the three of those guys just talk all the time. Wu said, I can't learn from them as much because their slot's so different. I do talk to Luis Castillo a little bit. Hey, but still Kirby has learned a sinker grip from Wu. So they are just a tight group that a lot of them came up together, and they just talk pitching. And anytime, the way that Miller said, anytime that someone sees like, oh, you're doing something good there, they're like, let me steal that from you. Like, what did you do? How'd you throw that? So Bryce Miller is dealing with a little bit of a side issue. He said he's throwing today, and I was disappointed to hear that because of his health issues last year. But one thing I wanted to report real quick was just that his location plus on his fastball, which was, he said, his big problem last year, is through the roof in the spring. It's 115. And I asked him about that, and he's like, yeah, I was putting it good. And he's like, it was letting it eat too. He said it was a nice 7 or so. So hopefully the oblique thing's a small thing because there's still, a lot of talent in that arm.
Yeah, you don't hear a lot of PRP injections in the oblique area, so I hope that's effective in a way to get him back out there quickly. But really encouraging that, the elbow trouble that he had last year seems to be subsiding. And if the stuff number on the fastball jumped like that and the velo is back at that level, that points to a pretty massive rebound if this other ailment proves to be a relatively minor spring one.
Yeah. And then there was a little disappointment. Dude talked about how close they got with Logan. He's like, yeah, but we're bringing back, so much of the same team. We proved we're good enough, and let's do it this year.
Yeah, well, hopefully they can keep everybody healthy and make that run again. It was a fun team to watch throughout 2025 and could be even better.
One last thing about their clubhouse, Randy Arozarena is just a plus clubhouse guy. It's there's always one guy that goes around the clubhouse and high fives everybody, and it's has a thing with everybody. Did you try that restaurant? Or what'd you shoot yesterday on the course? And he's doing it in Spanish and English, and he's just, and everyone's like, oh, Randy, So just, it was fun to watch, just this beloved dude, walking around giving everybody high fives. That's just a really great, and it's really awesome as a position player too. There's that everyday bit. He was just going around doing the rounds, and I was just like, people like you, man.
I think there's also a little bit of a void there with Eugenio Suarez, leaving for Cincinnati in the offseason too. And Suarez always gets, I think, high marks from everybody for reasons like that. Willy Adames is like that too.
We heard a story. I didn't ask to break this, but it's not like I'm breaking news, and I don't think this is pretty low stakes. But apparently, when they acquired Gino last year from Mariners, they were on the tarmac, and they waited because Gino was coming in on another flight or something, and the whole team waited, and they didn't know why they were waiting. And then the door opens and Gino comes in, and he said that the entire plane just went nuts. And just everybody's jumping out of their seats and screaming and let's go, So I just thought that was I don't know if maybe that's been reported, but it was just a fun look into how loved. And then we heard from somebody on the Red side that Gino comes to camp and he remembers everybody's names from years and years ago, and is shaking everybody's hands and doing the same thing Randy does, where he's just broadcasting happiness across the whole clubhouse.
Man, I don't know if I can broadcast happiness across an entire clubhouse. If I could just remember everybody's name from several years ago, that'd be a huge win for me. More to come on this episode, by the way. We've got a Dodgers preview with Katie Woo. We've got a Phillies preview with Matt Gelb. And for Eno, I think we're going to get you some SPF 50 because this is day 2 for you outside in the morning. You're looking okay right now, so we gotta stay on that sunscreen for you. Otherwise, you're gonna get charred out there podcasting in the sun.
Thanks, Mom. I'm definitely going to smear up because I'm about to go on a hike with my mother. And this is the mother that is the super marathoner. So I'm a little afraid that she's going to make me, run 20 miles in an hour. So
Yeah, you have no idea how far you're actually going to hike or run this afternoon. So I will make plans to have a few more guests available on Wednesday. Yeah, we'll send we'll get some prayers out there for you.
If all things go right, I will be reporting from Team USA camp tomorrow before their match with the Rockies. It's not called a match. Whatever.
Well, yeah, their game. Yeah, it's still a
WBC
game.
Though. Maybe it is a match.
It's not. It's still a game.
Is it a tie?
I think an exhibition like that could end in a tie, though. I think that could definitely.
No,
happen.
I think that's a soccer term, right? Tie. A tie is a soccer game.
A draw. The draw.
No. Is it a draw?
It's a draw.
I thought that was an English term. Anyway, we can cut all this if we have to. But a game between Team USA and the Rockies, which should be a laugher. We'll never know.
Well, see if you can squeeze into that ice bath too. Maybe you can actually get the pod with your legs submerged to recover from today's hike. But we're glad the spring Eno is back, and we'll look forward to catching up with you again on Wednesday.
Eno out.
All right, it's time to continue our team preview series, and we are lucky enough to have two Dodgers beat writers, the newest of which is Katie Wu, making the move from St. Louis. Katie, thank you so much for joining me today.
DVR, it's been a minute, and the last time we talked was a completely different team in a completely different state, so I'm excited to see how we break down a winning ball club and a back-to-back World Series championship club at that.
Yeah, I mean, it's unbelievable. The Dodgers are set up with an absurd projection. We've talked about PECOTA win total projections for every team in the series so far. Their number is 104.4, which basically, by the math, just means they have assembled a team that is in the playoffs already, even without playing a game. Obviously, there are things that could go catastrophically wrong and lead them to actually miss the playoffs, but they're highly unlikely to all happen in the same season. It would be bad for baseball if that happened, I think, just from a bunch of superstars got hurt. That's not good. But I think we should talk about this position player group first because the roster is extremely top-heavy. It's loaded with superstars. They did the thing you should do with the resources. They had a gap in the corner outfield. They went out and got the best one available. They got Kyle Tucker. They replaced Michael Conforto with Kyle Tucker. Beyond this, you look at Shohei Ohtani's going to have the usual huge role, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts. It's all the usual suspects at the top of the roster. The bottom half still leaves you with some questions about how the pieces all fit together. One thing that they do, that they've done well forever, is they don't overload Will Smith. So Will Smith doesn't get 600 plate appearances in the regular season because they know we're playing into October. He's important. We want his legs to still feel okay at the end of the season. So they back off him a little bit. And what that means is it kind of leaves this window for someone else to be a near max volume player, which is always exciting from a projections perspective. So I'm sort of curious as you look at guys like Max Muncy, Teoscar Hernandez, Andy Pages, who do you see actually kind of pushing their way up near the top of that plate appearance leaderboard? Because in fantasy baseball, we're chasing homers and steals and runs and RBIs, and playing every single day in this lineup is going to create a ton of value.
It's such a great question, and it's so fascinating to see how the Dodgers compile a legitimate superstar lineup. We know what the top of the lineup is going to look like on most days. It's going to be Ohtani leadoff, Kyle Tucker second, Mookie Betts going to the 3-hole for the first time in a long time, and then Freddie Freeman at cleanup. That slots Will Smith to 5, and then Max Muncy to 6, maybe Teoscar Hernandez down to 7. And that's what's interesting to me is because I think Teoscar Hernandez is primed for a big bounce back year. The Dodgers are moving him defensively from right field to left field, so Kyle Tucker is going to take over in right. And Teoscar was a huge candidate to be traded, and he was kind of right in the middle of all the rumors this offseason. And he took that personally. He came to Dodgers camp noticeably trimmer, still very much a member of the team, and knowing that if he wants to solidify his place in this dynasty for years to come, he's got to pick it up defensively and offensively. So I do think we're going to see him as an everyday regular, at least with Tommy Edman out, which we'll get to. But I think his plate appearances might dwindle a little bit because he's going to bat much farther down in the lineup. That goes to show if you have Teoscar Hernandez batting 7th for your lineup, it's probably pretty good. But I'm looking at Max Muncy at third, and I'm looking at Andy Pages in center. And this playing time is all really contingent on Tommy Edman, who is starting the year on the IL, coming back from right ankle surgery. Not necessarily a surprise. Dodgers are always expecting Edman to start the year injured. I just talked to him the other day, though. He's progressing for his timeline. So everything seems to be good there. The Dodgers are in a good spot, even if they don't have Edman in April. What that means, Andy Pages takes over as the everyday center fielder. Max Muncy is going to play third, and the Dodgers are kind of looking for that super utility Swiss Army knife that Tommy Edman is. That could be Hai-Sung Kim. He could be. I think the Dodgers are looking to platoon second base. Miggy Rowe is back. He's going to hit against lefties. We know that. Could Kim slot in and be the second half of that platoon and also back up Andy Pages in center? I think that might be how the Dodgers are looking at it currently. The only problem is they've had to put a pin in that conversation because Kim is going to go play for Team Korea in the World Baseball Classic. So the good news for Dodgers fans is you might not have a lot of answers about what the actual starting lineup is going to look like right now, but you certainly have a lot of options. And when you lose a regular like Tommy Edman, to be able to say like, hey, we're okay, actually, it's not going to be like that big of a problem, I think just goes to show the overall depth of the system.
I know a lot of people had questions about how the pitching staff was managed last year. The conspiracy theorists out there say the Dodgers had a bunch of guys who were just faking injuries. My more like based explanation is they just have the luxury of depth. When you have the luxury of depth, if you have an injury that you could return in 3 weeks from, you could take 6 weeks and be fully recovered. And if you can take 6 weeks, you do. A lot of teams can't afford that. I think it was a lot more of that. Could they apply a similar approach to their position player group? I mean, if this is going to be a full season of Shohei being a two-way player again, do they take a little bit off of his plate over the course of the regular season? For Mookie Betts being a 33-year-old shortstop and thinking about how his season unfolded last year, does he get occasional days off? Or maybe most likely, Freddie Freeman, he's the oldest of the bunch. He's 36 years old, and first base is an easier place to mix and match. Like, do they start to whittle away at the playing time when those guys are healthy for load management sake, or is it still more of a they'd have to go on the IL for you to really be to be worried about a significant drop off in their plate appearance volume?
It's a smart strategy. The problem is good luck getting any of those guys to agree with that, especially Freddie Freeman, who said he wants to play 162 games again this year. First time in the last 2 years that he's come to spring really feeling healthy. And you are right. First base is kind of the easiest place for the Dodgers to kind of use that load management because you can put Will Smith there, Dalton rushing, Will Smith's backup, their top catching prospect, can also see some time at first base. But that is all contingent on Freddie Freeman saying, hey, I want the day. And Freddie Freeman is not going to say, hey, I want the day. I mean, do you see what this guy went through in the 2024 World Series? He had like half a body and he was like, nope, I'm going to post and hit one of the biggest home runs in franchise history. So good luck getting Freeman out of that lineup. Mookie Betts, same thing. Ohtani, no way. I think there's more to be said question-wise about what he can do on the mound rather than, just taking him for a DH day. So it's interesting because a lot of teams use their DH as a rotating carousel for days off. The Dodgers aren't going to do that, nor should they, given who they have as their DH. So it's interesting to see how maybe this load management question could be implemented, but it's all going to be contingent on these players actually agreeing to said load management, and I don't see that happening for a group that is very hungry. We talked to Mookie Betts earlier in the week, coming off his worst offensive season of his career. And he actually did say, I have to take the less is more approach. So he's coming into spring, ramping up slowly, just now started playing Cactus League games. That's by design, so he can have a fully healthy and refreshed season instead of spending most of it searching, trying to find his feel at the plate, learning a new position. So many of these guys have so much more to prove, and that's so interesting to say when you think about the careers that they have, both clear Hall of Famers. But again, I don't see them coming out of the lineup, which means the load management might not be as easy to do on the position side than the rotation side.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're talking about guys that want to three-peat. They want to do as much as they can for that, but also care about their own legacies. Like, they care about their Cooperstown cases, which are strong already. But easy enough to sit here and say, yeah, take a few days off. And they're like, no, we don't want days off. So I think what I'm gathering from you is it just takes actual IL stints for them to apply similar principles, where if someone does go down with a hamstring strain, instead of coming back after the minimum, they take the extra week. They take a little longer, and that's probably the smarter way to go in the long run anyway. And then those guys might be more on board with that. So like, yeah, I don't want this to be a problem again later. I'm going to make sure this minor thing stays minor by actually taking the appropriate amount of rest. You mentioned Haesung Kim, and I think he's pretty interesting because they used him very selectively last year, and at least until Edman's back, second base does seem to be a lot more open, and even after Edman comes back, his versatility could leave Kim on the big side of a platoon. Prior to leaving to join Team Korea's camp, how did Kim look this spring? Did he look bulked up? Did anything look different about him?
He certainly impressed manager Dave Roberts, and there was a lot, I think, looking at Kim, because the Dodgers are going to wait for Tommy Edman to be 100% fully healthy. Last year, he kind of went through IL stints with that ankle, and he wasn't really comfortable playing center field, and that's Tommy Edman's biggest strength, is his versatility and his ability to play throughout the diamond. So the Dodgers aren't going to rush him back until Tommy Edman can play both second base and center field to the high caliber that he's already shown. That puts a lot of the emphasis on Kim right now, who I think when you look at his bat, there is, not a lot of slug, but he doesn't profile to be a slug hitter. You also don't need to be a slug hitter when your top of the lineup is Ohtani, Tucker, Betts, Freeman. All right. But with Kim, I think there's just been an all-around better showcase of pitch selection. He's controlled the zone a lot better. He's really impressed Dave Roberts with the quality of his at-bats, and that's kind of what the Dodgers need him to be. Again, when you're going to platoon at second base, because while they haven't straight up said it, I think when you just look at how the Dodgers use their everyday lineup, a platoon at second makes the most sense. They just need him to get on base because he's most likely going to be the 8th or 9th hitter. So you're setting the table for Ohtani and Tucker. You don't need to slug doubles. You just need to get on base. And I think having a much better pitch selection, being able to work the count, being able to lay off the high fastball, all that spin, that will benefit Kim a lot. And he's had a pretty successful job so far in the small stint that we've seen. So I don't want to declare him the front runner necessarily. I think it's too early in March. And again, we're not going to see him for a little bit. But it is interesting to see what the Dodgers are going to do. They do have Santiago Espinal on a minor league deal. That will require a roster move should he make camp or break camp with the team. But right now, I think Kim really does have the ability to break in as a starting second baseman in that platoon. And who knows how long Edman's going to be out. This could be the long run that he didn't really get with LA last year.
Yeah, I want to see if the swing and miss comes down a little bit. It was a 30% strikeout rate for Kim in his big league debut a season ago, but 13 for 14 as a base stealer. He's dangerous if he gets on. I think that's the appeal if he ends up coming into more playing time than expected. Andy Pages had a late season fade with the bat. I mean, in the playoffs, he was just lost up there. What's the feeling around him so far this spring? We know his defense is really important. Being their best option in center is going to drive a lot of playing time for him. But do the Dodgers feel good about where he's at despite that slump he went into in October?
I think so. And we've seen Andy Pages be one of the starters that has seen the most action in Cactus League games so far. That's by design. It's just to get reps in. He's going to be the starting center fielder again. You can make the argument that he actually profiles better defensively in the corner with Edman at center, but those corner outfield spots are taken. But, this is not a knock on Andy Pages defensively. I think the key for him, he's clearly shown he can hit the ball. He had the second most homers for the Dodgers last year behind Ohtani. So that's that all around. You've seen what you have in your bottom of the lineup with some slug. We just talked about how the Dodgers don't need it, but they do have a little bit of it with Pages. And I think it's just finding a way to keep that consistently. Ball players are going to slump. The fact that he did so in the postseason, probably not a great feeling for him, but I think the Dodgers are very comfortable with what he can do in center field, even if he doesn't profile exactly to be the best defensive fit. He's the best defensive fit they have at the moment. And again, this all hinges on when Edman is going to be ready. But right now, this kind of B team version of their starting lineup is good enough to win arguably any division in baseball.
Yeah, they'd still be in really good shape, even if they were to deal with an absence or two from that kind of core group at the top of the roster. I think where things could go wrong for them from a projection standpoint is multiple long-term injuries to the superstar core up top, right? That starts to make them look like other contenders and not just like the clear front runner to bring home the World Series again in 2026. The pitching is still very interesting. Lots of depth there. Same kind of approach to the offseason, though, where we were talking about the biggest need at the end of last season on the pitching side was in the bullpen. The Dodgers bullpen was actually pretty bad in October. We had Roki Sasaki taking on a larger role, closing some games, and then not really looking like he could handle that by the end of the World Series. They go out, they get Edwin Diaz. They get the best reliever on the market doing typical Dodger things. I think better health across that unit will make them look a lot better this year as well. So I don't have a lot of short-term concerns about the bullpen, but I do have questions about how they piece together the rotation, because Yamamoto worked very hard in October. It's a huge part of why they won that World Series, and he's pitching for Japan in the World Baseball Classic. So his season is starting earlier, a little more intensity in the WBC, of course, than pitching in spring training. Thinking about the season that Roki had a year ago, the injury that Snell's dealing with right now, easing Shohei back in as a pitcher, they're going to use that depth right away. So I know you wrote about their schedule, kind of doing them some favors, especially to begin the year. There are enough off days where they don't necessarily have to go to a straight six-man right away if they don't want to. But who's actually picking up extra starts to begin this season while they put their pieces back together?
This is, I think, the biggest question the Dodgers have. And, if we make a lot of jokes that it's the most boring camp in baseball, given the structure of their entire roster. But I do think that this is interesting because the Dodgers are built in a way where they can essentially have a first half rotation and a second half rotation. And they have such a luxury of depth where their 6, 7, 8 starters are probably 3 or 4 starters in any other team in the National League. So guys that I'm looking at right now as we figure out, one, what can Ohtani do as he ramps up away from the team? He's not pitching for Team Japan in the WBC. So the Dodgers don't know what he's going to be built up to when he returns to the team. And then what Roki Sasaki is going to look like, what Tyler Glasnow is going to look like, though he's looked pretty good in these limited showings so far. It opens the door for a lot of different guys. Emmett Sheehan is the top of that list for me. And he is one of those guys that I think fits into both the first half and the second half rotation, should he be healthy. He came back from Tommy John halfway through last season and posted a very commendable, I think the Dodgers used him as a hybrid starter. So your 6th starter, he could take a start if you needed him to. He could pitch 3 or 4 innings in middle relief. He could basically do it all. I actually think the Dodgers are going to see Emmett Sheehan as more of a traditional starter this year and how they use him, because based on the workload of Ohtani, of Yamamoto, of Snell when he comes back, they're going to need someone that can get by these guys rest, especially during those stretches in the season after April where they go a long time without those built-in off days. So Emmett Sheehan, he hasn't yet pitched in a Cactus League game. He will this week. He was battling an illness early in camp that set him back a few days. He's fully expected to hit the Dodgers' targeted range of 5 innings, 75 pitches by the time the team breaks camp at the end of March. So I'm going ahead and I'm going to plug Emmett Sheehan right in there. I like Justin Wroblewski. He's kind of right along there. Dave Roberts said they're going to use Sheehan and Wroblewski. They view him at both of them as starters, and they're going to view it that way until they're not. So those two guys kind of, I think, lead the depth chart in terms of guys that the Dodgers can use to slot into their rotation while their big guns either build up or get healthy. Another guy that was on that list for me, but now is out of that conversation, is Gavin Stone. He looked really impressive in his 1 inning of work last week, but experienced some shoulder discomfort. He just missed all of 2025 with shoulder surgery. So he was shut down, no throw. MRI results revealed no structural damage. So that's good, but he's going to be no throw for a couple of weeks, and that kind of just takes him out of the opening day picture. And I wonder if that opens the door for someone like River Ryan, another pitcher who missed all of 2025 coming back from elbow surgery. He's looked pretty sharp in his limited appearances as well. There's a difference in coming back from Tommy John, and there's a difference between the shoulder recovery and elbow recovery. And I think at the beginning of the spring, the Dodgers were much more cognizant of that. But River Ryan, I think if he continues to show some improvement, build up that strength, better velo, he could force his way into that conversation as well. But right now, the two guys I'm looking at to break into as starters that maybe we weren't thinking of, it's Emmett Sheehan and it's Justin Wroblewski.
Yeah, I think they will be very useful, at least in the short term. I mean, Sheehan's going to be, I think, good all year. But Wroblewski's one of those guys that people might not be thinking a lot about in fantasy that will actually have immediate value if he's the last starter in for a little while. The team context is good, and he's good. He'd start on a lot of other teams as a every 5th day sort of guy. What's the level of concern with Blake Snell? Because the The faraway view from a person like me is they are just handling him with care. There's not an actual problem there. He's been falling in drafts, but I haven't heard any report of a strain or a sprain or any sort of actual injury. It seems more like fatigue carrying over and just kind of pushing everything back for his timetable for the sake of keeping their eyes on late October and just worrying a lot less about the first half or possibly all of April.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's fatigue. And I think Blake Snell has been very candid about how he kind of pushed through some things early last season. First year with a new team, wanted to go out and show the signing was worth it, and ended up on the IL for a good portion of the season. And I think that's understandable when you're coming in and you sign a mega contract like that to join the World Series champions and you want to prove yourself. I can certainly understand why Snell felt the way that he did. And I think that's why it's just as important to make sure he and the team don't fall into that same path again this year. And that's why they're slow playing his spring. That's why he's, not going to be ready for opening day. And there is no true timetable for when he could return because it's fatigue based. And the Dodgers don't need Blake Snell in April. They need Blake Snell in September because, and this is for multiple reasons. We just talked about the depth that they have. They can give opportunities to Sheehan or Bluesky while they wait for a healthy Snell. It does nobody, not the team, not the player, any good to ramp Snell up when you know that he's tired and he's not right, just to have him make a couple starts in April and lose him for 3-4 months, just like last year. So I think being cautious is the right thing to do here. You've heard Blake say it before that he wasn't right all year. He was pitching on fumes in the World Series, really gutted out, starting from the NLCS to the end of the World Series. Some very admirable performances, but right now I think the focus is making sure that they have Blake Snell again for those performances. They don't need him in March. They don't need him ready to go, throwing 99, all the way built out at the end of camp. They need him to be right for when they really need him, which is the second half of the season. So they're going to continue slow playing Snell. The good news is, though, is there doesn't seem to be any structural damage. There are no strains. It's just fatigue. So as soon as the Dodgers can continue building him up, you'll see him ramp up more accordingly, but there really is no rush to bring Snell up right now.
The wild card for me, though, is Roki Sasaki, right? Year one did not go the way that any of us would have expected. I think even if you hadn't seen a lot of Sasaki outside of maybe the World Baseball Classic a few years ago, if you read scouting reports and kind of just believed in A, the Dodgers process, and B, the success he had in Japan, you would have said, okay, yeah, there's going to be a 25% strikeout rate. There's going to be great ratios. He's going to be part of that starting mix. Every 6 days, he's going to take the ball and he's going to be really good. It was nothing like that. I mean, it was only 36 in the third innings in the big leagues because he was hurt, and injuries were part of the story for him in Japan, but he was so effective that I kind of put him more in that glass now sort of mold of even if you don't know how many innings you're going to get, they're going to be great innings. Where is Roki entering year two with the Dodgers? Notably, he's with them. He's not in camp. He's not part of Team Japan for the World Baseball Classic. Do they feel like he's in a good place, and are they relying on him as a starter to begin the season, given all the other issues we're talking about?
Yeah, they definitely need Roki Sasaki to get right, and they do have plans to have him in their rotation to start the year. That goes back to not being sure about where Ohtani is going to be, being careful with the workload for Glass now, no Snell, and then having to rely on other guys like Sheehan and Wroblewski. So Sasaki is going to be right in the mix, and Dave Roberts has straight up said that he expects Yamamoto and Glasnow and Sasaki to be used and stretched out as traditional starters to start the season. And there's been a lot of to talk about with Roki Sasaki, maybe adding a third pitch to that arsenal. We know that he has the triple-digit fastball. The forkball plays really well, and there's been a lot to be made about can he expand that arsenal? And I can see both sides here. Roki Sasaki is who he is and has the ceiling and the pedigree that he has because of what he's been able to do with the two-pitch arsenal. And if he can control that, if he can command the fastball, utilize the forkball, and get those results, that third pitch suddenly becomes a lot less important. The problem is in his first year, he wasn't able to do that. So if you mix in, he calls it like a cutter and a slider. I have decided to term that pitch as a slutter. So I'm not sure if that's going to pass on or catch on. But if it does, you heard it here first. The slutter, if you will, becomes a lot less important. But he hasn't been able to establish the fastball velo consistently. A lot of that does go into, I think, a twofold argument. Roki Sasaki was not sure how to communicate with the Dodgers, and the Dodgers were learning him, and it's a huge jump to go from Japan to the major leagues. That, I think, it's lost on a lot of the players who make that jump, but the drop in talent is significant compared to the major leagues. So I think there was a level of communication that the Dodgers had to reestablish with Sasaki, and I also think they have a much better understanding of the injuries that he was dealing with in the years prior to him coming to Los Angeles. So when you put that all together, yes, he needs to reestablish the arsenal, whether that's more of a two-pitch focus or you mix in the third pitch. I can see either side, but making sure that both sides have more effective communication, and I think to their credit, the Dodgers feel much more confident about this year, will go a long way in ensuring that the Dodgers actually get a full season of Roki Sasaki and a good version, because what they saw last year, I think there was a lot to be fixed and addressed over the offseason to make sure that doesn't happen coming into this year.
Yeah, that fastball was just very hittable. He had trouble holding velocity working as a starter. The command wasn't very good. I mean, I think you can overcome like one of those flaws usually, but you put more than one of those things together and you start to unravel pretty quickly. And I think maybe it was easy to underestimate, too, the difficulty of coming over as a 23-year-old. You know, a lot of guys that finally leave NPB are 25, 26, and that helps in terms of maturity, being able to figure out problems when something goes wrong. Maybe this is also the first time he's really hit a true wall as a professional. We see that a lot of times for guys, they cruise through the minor leagues, come to the big leagues, go to their first prolonged slump, or they get hit for the first time, and it's like, now what do I do? The things I've done my entire career no longer work. So maybe there was some of that for Roki as well. It feels to me like everything's on the table eventually. Like for the beginning of the season, he gets his shot. That makes him happy. If it's not going well, as Snell gets healthy, as some of the other guys filling in continue to show that they can hold up, maybe a demotion back to AAA is in the cards at some point if it's not clicking, and maybe a move back into the bullpen is something that they consider at some point. It just feels like there's really a lot of different ways his 2026 could look.
I agree, and I think those are all on the table, but I would argue with his pedigree and who he could be as a starting pitcher, the Dodgers would do him a disservice moving him back to the bullpen. Now, they did what they had to do in October to win the World Series. That is completely different. Using Roki, who wasn't even built up long-term to start anyway, in the bullpen as it was falling apart, was actually probably the smartest decision they could have made for both the player and the team. This year, I think would actually, if it gets to that point, if Roki starts the season and he's struggling, the fastball isn't there, he can't sustain the velo, I think it makes much more sense for his career long-term to option him to AAA than it would be to revert him to a bullpen arm, because you can't fix your arsenal. You can't fix what you're working on against major league hitters in relief stints, which are most likely coming in the most pivotal parts of the game if you're going to use him there. So that's probably the worst time where you can go out and feel like you need to fine-tune and work on things. So obviously, you hope it doesn't get to this point for Roki. He's a generational talent for a reason. I think so many people look forward to his starts because of what he could do. Well, not exactly what he's shown yet, but what is on the table, what's on the future. But if he goes out and he struggles, I think it makes much more sense to option him to AAA where he can really work on what's going wrong if it does in fact get to that point.
Yeah, and I guess if I think about bullpen opportunities for him, it might be more in that long relief role rather than short relief, because you're still maximizing innings. You're trying to see how he holds velo. Maybe you have someone like River Ryan, who you're also watching kind of carefully from an innings perspective with him coming off TJ, and you say, okay, River Ryan's given us 4 and change. Roki's coming through and maybe going through the lineup once. Like that could be maybe the other way you go around it at some point, because you may decide, well, we also want him around the big leaguers. We want him solving big league hitters, but we also want him around our best coaches. We want him to be on this stage. So yeah, lots and lots of ways this could play out. For an off-season grade, Katie, I gave them an A. I mean, like, what else could they have done? Like they're playing the big chip stack perfectly. Like I have no pushback on what they're doing so far. They have a great position and they're using it. But that win total projection, 104.4, we've been getting some heat from the listeners and viewers for being generally too optimistic about many teams. We always want to say, oh, that projection's too cold. They're going to win 5 more games in that projection. 104.4 is just such an absurd win total projection, and seeing that they actually had to kind of scrap a little bit at the end of last season makes me inclined to say 104.4 is probably too hot, because I trust that they will manage the roster carefully enough and with a projection that's more than 20 wins higher than the next closest team in division, I just don't see enough pressure coming from the Giants, the Padres, and the D-backs for them to have to push it that hard.
That's a great point. 104 is outrageous, even for Dodgers expectations. And there is, I think, when you look at the rest of the NL West, Rockies excluded, apologies to Colorado, everyone else is right around a 500 team. If you told me that the D-backs snuck into a wild card spot with 87 wins, I wouldn't be surprised. You could say that about the Giants or the Padres, and I'd be like, yeah, that sounds right. I think for the Dodgers, what's really going to stand out to me, not necessarily the load management, because I think that's something that we're going to talk about all season long. It's, do they push for the bye this year? Because they didn't have the bye last year, and they had to play that 3-game series against Cincinnati. And the bye is super valuable, especially when you have kind of the older superstars being able to take a break and rest, get a week off in between the regular season and the postseason to get that bye. I wonder if that changes how the Dodgers ramp up through the second half of the season. All of that is contingent on health, obviously, but I do think there's a case to be made where the Dodgers can put the pedal down a little more firmly to ensure they get the bye, because nobody wants to be the third seed. Nobody wants to actually do that wild card round, especially if you win the division. So there is some incentive there for them. I agree, 104 is I think a little hot. If they go out and do it, though, is anyone really going to be surprised? This is the Dodgers for a reason. Look, you talked about this, DVR. They had 2 things they wanted to fix in the offseason. Just 2, corner outfield and a closer, and they go out and they address those issues, and they do so by getting the best possible options you could possibly get. So this is what they do. So maybe, the more I talk about it, who am I to say 104 is too high? If anyone can do it, it's this team.
All right, so maybe a just right from Katie. I'll say too hot just because I think, and I could be dead wrong, that with that slightly older roster, they're going to be a little careful. But their depth is really impressive, as we talked about. Katie, appreciate your time and your insight. Looking forward to talking to you throughout the season. I'm sure we'll make sure we get a good rotation going with you and Fabian, because the Dodgers come up all the time. So I'm very glad we've got 2 of you on the beat now.
Yes, it'll be great. I'm certainly looking forward to a brand new season, and it's no NL Central, but it'll work.
Thanks, Katie. One more team preview to get to today. It's time to talk Phillies, and to do that, we bring in Matt Gelb. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Derek.
This was a good Phillies team last year, a very good Phillies team, and I think you could be impatient as a fan because the window's been open for a few years, and they haven't quite got there with this core, but they bring back Schwarber. They bring back Real Muto, which seemed essential to keep both of those guys, given what was behind them as possible replacements. And they basically just replaced Nick Castellanos with Adolis Garcia. So at least in terms of the core veteran bats, it's a lot more of the same and maybe an upgrade in one corner spot. What's been the overall reaction to this as the off-season plan? Is there a fair level of trust across the fan base that if they need more at the deadline, they're going to go get it? Or is there concern that another year older, a team that has been close but fallen short, might not have what it takes to chase down the Dodgers and to stay on the same level as a Mets team that continues to churn and spend like crazy?
And it's interesting. I would say the reaction, inside the Phillies complex is very different than the reaction, I think, outside the Phillies complex. And I think the reaction within the Philadelphia area is very different than the national reaction, right? I think nationally, a lot of people look at this team and say, it's a really good team. It's a talented team. It is in the small group of teams that hypothetically could dethrone the Los Angeles Dodgers. And I think all of that is fair. I think in Philadelphia, I think a lot of fans, not everybody, but a lot, and sometimes it's the vocal minority, but a lot of people are like you said, impatient or frustrated, and understandably so. This is a team that looks a lot like last year's. The Phillies would say, well, that team had a lot of success, and that team, for 4 games, played the Dodgers, about as close as you can. And, I know nobody wants to hear it in Philadelphia, but there's a couple things that go the other way, and the Phillies win that series. And certainly, we could sit here all day and debate the ifs in this sport, so that's not going to make anybody happy. But you're right, Derek. You kind of went over some of the changes. I think the Phillies would say they're going to get a little younger, and they have to. They're finally going to infuse some young talent into this roster. Whether those guys are difference makers from the start, I don't think they're expecting that. Justin Crawford's going to play center field and bat ninth, most likely. Andrew Painter is going to be, quote unquote, the fifth starter, really, to start the season. So they're not asking for huge contributions from these guys, but they're asking them to be contributors. And I think we can expect that. Now, I do think the bullpen is a spot, where they've definitely made a lot of change. And that said, I think you can be objective and look at this roster and say, yes, it does look the same, but I think internally they're saying there are some pressure points here. Rotation depth is one, and I think the outfield is another. And I think it's pretty obvious that those are two weaknesses that could be exposed and might be the two things that, really prevent the Phillies, I think, from being repeat division champs.
Relatively speaking, though, I think those are probably two areas on the roster that are easier to fix on the fly, to go get upgrades in season. Like there's more supply in those areas if you're trying to bolster your team in that way. So that it seems like they're in really good shape. I'm glad you mentioned Crawford, because for most of these previews, we're looking at who are the core 5 hitters, who plays every day. We know with the Phillies. We know who those guys are, right? It's Trey Turner. It's Kyle Schwarber. It's Bryce Harper. It's Real Muto a lot, even though he's a catcher. It's Bohm a lot, for now at least, until Aiden Miller's ready. And then they kind of platoon with Marsh and Stott, and maybe they'll platoon Justin Crawford too. But with Crawford, he's definitely a guy that fantasy players are excited about because there's speed. There's been a great average in OBP. It's a strange profile, though, because he hits the ball on the ground a ton. So I'm just curious, has he been working on his swing in a way that's going to help him generate a little bit more loft? Like, part of it is knowing your game and doing what's made you successful up to this point. But the Crawford skeptics say you really can't function as a above average big league hitter hitting the ball on the ground 60% of the time or more, which is what he's done pretty much at every stop on the way to Philly.
He's a really interesting one. And I think within the Phillies organization, I mean, they've been really aggressive with him over the years, right? They keep promoting him earlier maybe than they should, but it's because he has success. He has these great results, and the minors are like, okay, we're going to test him. We're going to push him. And, maybe he gets to a point where he has a little bit of adversity and we do, make some bigger swing changes. He never got there. I mean, he just kept producing in the minors, and to the point where they almost called him up last summer to the majors. They instead traded for Harrison Bader, and that worked out for the Phillies. But I think Crawford has made some changes, some subtle ones, and they haven't gotten to the point where they're like, they don't want him to redo everything, even though it might not look pretty, it might not seem intuitive when you watch the swing, because it is a swing that often looks like it's designed to get, to hit the ball on the ground, which you don't want the modern player to do, obviously. I think he's made some changes, some subtle ones. He was applying them last year at the end of the year at AAA. And you did see, I think, the quality of contact improve. But Derek, I don't know. I'm going to challenge people to just watch him for the first few months, because I fully agree with you. It's going to be really hard for a guy to succeed in the majors if he's going to hit the ball on the ground 60%. There are some intricacies, some subtle things to think about here, though, is that because of the speed, one, some of those balls on the ground are hits for Justin Crawford, and maybe not enough to justify 60% ground ball rate. Two, defenses have to play him differently because of the speed element, because of the bunt element, and he'll often force teams to bring the third baseman and the first baseman in a little more. He'll often force teams to bring the shortstop in a little more, and that does allow more of those ground balls to get through the infield. And I don't look, I don't know if it's going to work. I mean, I think he, to me, is such a fascinating guy going into the season, because the Phillies don't need him to be a star right away. They don't even need him to be an above average offensive performer. I think if he plays a solid center field and is an average offensive performer, batting ninth, doing his thing, getting on base, using his legs to swipe a bag, getting on base ahead of Turner, Harper, and Schwarber at a decent enough rate, I think they will be ecstatic. I think that he could be better than that. He could. I mean, he could also be worse. I mean, the range of outcomes on this guy is really, really, really interesting. It's because it's a profile that we don't see in modern baseball, and I don't think that we should be necessarily trying to make him something he's not. I think the best lineups right now are the ones that have some diversity, that aren't all or nothing approaches across the lineup. Just because Justin Crawford isn't going to hit the ball in the air to the pull side as much as some other guys in the lineup, or as much as the modern major league player should, doesn't mean that he can't be an effective offensive performer. That said, I don't know. It might not work. I don't know. I mean, it's a really weird one. I can't wait to see it.
It's so interesting, too, just because in the very, very limited sample we've seen in the spring, it is a 45% ground ball rate. We're talking 15, 16 plate appearances, so you can't put any sort of stock into that. But to your broader point, I think if he is 10% worse than a league average hitter as a rookie, as a 22-year-old rookie playing above average defense in center field, the Phillies are happy to take that in year one and say, let's just keep working at it. Because I do think the quality of his at-bats is going to matter too. Like, you might not be a league average hitter right away, but if you're making opposing pitchers work, helping turn the lineup over, and when you do get on, you're putting a lot of pressure on opposing pitchers and catchers, which I think he'll do, that does carry enough value, especially from the 9 spot where you're happy with it.
Yeah, and it's funny because even if you watch some of the spring at-bats, you can tell, and I heard this last year when I went and wrote about him and watched him, is that the best compliment that his teammates gave him is that he is annoying. And they meant that in the nicest ways, because he is annoying to pitchers. I mean, because he will take the most ridiculous swings, like butt out, hacking away, and he fights off a pitch, he fouls it off, and he keeps the bat going. And it's not going to look pretty at times. He's going to take some swings where you're like, what in the world is this? But he has a way of extending the at-bats, and it's just, he's an annoying at-bat, and I think you're right. I mean, batting ninth, like, if that is what he is, obviously there needs to be some results in addition to that, but he's not a finished product. Like, to your point, Derek, I mean, like, this guy, he's 22 and he's still growing, and like, obviously he's got, we know what his father was and what his father looked like, and his father looked very different in the middle of his career than he did when he first came up, at least body wise, I guess is what I'm saying. So Crawford, I think, is still adding some muscle, and I think that's only going to help, maybe the line drive stroke down the line.
It's not quite the low K rate profile that you look for from like a Quan or Jacob Wilson, but it's a good enough strikeout rate where I think it ultimately will find a way to work. The player that it actually reminds me of, just from an early season Fangraphs page back at the baseball card perspective, is a little bit of Adam Eaton as a hitter. I think Crawford profiles to be a better defender in center field, but Adam Eaton had really high ground ball rates when he was breaking through with Arizona, even in that first really good season that he had with the White Sox. I think Crawford's more of a burner on the base paths too, just based on what we've seen from him so far coming up through the Phillies system. So if you're looking for a guy that did make it work, starting his career with a ground ball rate like that, Adam Eaton maybe is an okay floor sort of comp. The other prospect here, Aiden Miller, probably not as close to the big league roster as Justin Crawford is, at least as of this spring, but what types of scenarios are there that would open the door for Miller to have a significant role for the Phillies at some point here in 2026?
Well, there's a little bit of murkiness with Miller right now because he has not played yet this spring, and he's been sidelined by, I guess, what I could only describe as nagging back soreness. And that's not what you want in a young prospect, for sure. It's something that I think he definitely dealt with at the end of last year and played through it. That aside, this guy's prospect status has really risen. And I think what has contributed to that is a better than expected performance at shortstop, which is where I don't think that a lot of evaluators saw him going. When he was drafted late in the first round, profiled more as a corner guy, power corner guy. Last year, he ended up being, a better than average defender at shortstop who was stealing like 60 bags. And it's like, okay, this is a very different profile than the one the Phillies drafted. I think if we're looking at 2026 for him in the majors, it's some kind of situation where either there's a long-term injury on the infield and they say, okay, it's time for Miller. They're not just going to bring him up if he's not going to be able to play every day. The other scenario is that if there's struggles at third base with Alec Boehm, who is in the final year of club control, probably doesn't factor into the club's long-term plans. Nevertheless, is probably going to be batting cleanup for them on opening day. His path here has been well documented. I mean, they have tried to trade him over the last 2 off seasons, have not found exactly the best match, and they've just decided to go with it. If Boehm does not perform in the first few months of the season, and Miller is performing at AAA, like, I don't think they're going to be afraid to make a switch there, especially because Bohm is going into his free agent year, and it's not as if they have to necessarily salvage value there, I guess, for lack of a better term. So Miller's close. You're right. He's not going to be breaking camp with the Phillies, especially with this injury now, but he wasn't going to break camp anyway. I think that you'll see him play a little more second base and third base at AAA this year. He was primarily a shortstop last season in the minor leagues. He will get more time at other positions at AAA this year because they, have a shortstop. And Trey Turner was really, really, really good at shortstop last year. I know there were questions about him moving off. He's not moving off yet. So if Miller comes up in 2026, it's probably for third base, maybe second base, maybe shortstop if there's a long-term injury to Turner. But there are different paths to Miller getting to the big leagues and, being a guy for them in 2026.
Yeah, I think there was a point earlier in the winter we were just knocking around some of our wildest ideas. What would you do to make room for somebody? And I said, well, I guess you could move Trey Turner this year into one of the outfield spots just to get Miller in there to say you got your best 9 bats out there. But that does feel pretty far-fetched, at least at this point in time. You never know what the next few months will bring. Let's shift the focus over to the pitching. And you lose Ranger Suarez in free agency. Andrew Painter, who you mentioned earlier, now becomes a lot more important. And his 2025 at AAA just didn't go the way many of us would have expected. I mean, I think looking human was just not what we would have wrote down as the most likely outcome, given how well he had pitched before getting hurt. I mean, the numbers were eye-popping at each stop. And I guess the big part of this is it was a long layoff. Like, he went 2 full years without pitching in a game. And I think you could chalk at least some of last year up to just rust, but where is he at this spring? Does the stuff look like it's taken a step forward from last year? And what have the Phillies done to try and help prepare him for a step forward in his debut season coming off of a year at AAA where it just didn't go great?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the focus is on the fastball, right? I mean, it's because the fastball was, before the injury, it was like it had the characteristics of a fastball that would be very successful in the major leagues. And he did not return with that same fastball last year. And I'm not even talking about velocity. I'm talking about shape. They attributed some of it to arm slot issues, and his arm slot was dropping last year. I think it was a bit of a fatigue. Like you said, huge layoff. I mean, and not only that, I mean, it was a big layoff, and then he goes to AAA essentially right out the gate last year, and he had never pitched at that level. I mean, he had barely pitched at AA before the injury. So a lot of factors at play, but I mean, I think the fastball is something to watch, and just the shape and kind of the swings he's getting in the zone. If he's able to dot it at the top of the zone, which is where he lived before the injury, and it was, had such great ride to it that it was a real weapon, especially against lefties. Lefties crushed his fastball last year at AAA. Big problem. I would say that he's looked different this spring. I mean, it just feels like he's more comfortable with the situation. I think he had to go through what he went through last year. Now, that's the silver lining look at it. Obviously, they would have preferred him to have been knocking on the door last year, forcing them to bring him up to the majors, being some sort of contributor in October. He wasn't that. The evaluators I've talked to, I think most from other teams have been like, look, this guy still checks every box. He has the look of a starter. He's got, the body, the repertoire, everything you would check in a frontline type starter. A lot of scouts have not changed their grades on Painter's stuff. I just think that their confidence in him achieving some of the projections has gone down a little bit, and rightfully so. I mean, because we don't know. And so the Phillies were chalking up to first year back from Tommy John, long layoff, AAA, game sped up on him, arm slot dropped. So all these things they feel like they've been able to check off and address. He's a normal player this spring, which he wasn't last spring. They were managing his innings, and so he was just kind of there. He wasn't pitching. I mean, he's just happy, I think, to be in games. Let's see. I mean, because they really need this guy to be, they don't need him to be a lot, but they need him to be a competent major league starter in 2026. And I think it would be really disappointing if he can't reach that bar. It's very possible he's more than that. I mean, I think this guy, he's very much an unknown, which we thought before we kind of knew what he was going to be. I think he's definitely an unknown going into 2026.
Yeah, maybe the question now is, does he have a true ace ceiling? It's not even that. It's like, is he more of like a 3 in a really positive sort of outcome? Even that's still a great development, like to turn a first rounder into a number 3 starter is it's not nothing. You didn't lose in that whole process. But I think, it's Painter versus Taijuan Walker eventually to stick in that number 5 spot with the assumed return to health of Zack Wheeler. By all accounts, everything you've posted about Zack Wheeler and his recovery has been better than expected. I mean, that has to be a very, very pleasant surprise so far in Phillies camp.
He really wanted to pitch opening day, but they told him you probably should push the brakes on that a little bit. So, yeah, I mean they're happy. He's happy, and it doesn't. Zack Wheeler is not typically happy about a lot of things, and so I think he is happy about the progress. And again, kind of an unknown though. I mean, like he's coming back from the quote unquote good thoracic outlet syndrome surgery, the one that affected the veins, not the nerves. So, I mean, we'll see. People have been kind of cagey about like the velo and bullpens, but also velo and his first 2 bullpen sessions is not that important. But I think it's been to the point where they're like, okay, keep going. There hasn't been any red flags yet. I mean, he has progressed along this about as smoothly as he could. I'm still looking at him late April, somewhere around there. I mean, he might try to push it to be mid-April. I'm going to say confidently, like he's back, sometime in late April. So the question is, what does he look like when he comes back, right? I mean, is he the Zack Wheeler from before? We don't know. If he's 90, 80% Zack Wheeler, maybe, you're not as happy as you were before, but also that's not bad either. He's been like one of the 3 best pitchers in the sport or 4 best pitchers in the sport for the last few years. So if he's only a top 15 pitcher, top 10 pitcher, I mean, I think they would be okay with that.
It still works. You got Christopher Sanchez up in that list as well. So having those 2 guys at the top of the rotation is huge. And then, of course, the other question here is Aaron Nola coming off a year. I mean, injuries finally caught up to him after just being a workhorse year over year over year. ERA got north of 6, still had about a strikeout per inning. Sierra had him at a 381. So there's just sort of like a basic, like, hey, wait a minute, he shouldn't have been this bad. I know the home run rate went through the roof. It was as bad as it's ever been for him. What are you seeing from Nola so far this spring, and what would you tell people who are assuming we'll get something that looks more like 2024 in terms of ratios than the bloated numbers we saw a year ago?
Better velocity. I mean, he is typically a slow starter, and I know he's never going to be a guy who we're going to be measuring by velocity, but, last year before the injuries, I mean, he's like 88, 89 in April, and you're like, this is it's not going to work because he is a guy who very much has a thinner margin because he throws in the low 90s typically, but he can spot it. Now, if it's 88, 89, you're like, I don't know. I mean, and it was hard for him to succeed at that velocity. He was like 92, 93 in his first spring outing, which was like pretty surprising to me, if I'm being honest. I did not expect that. He ramped up a little earlier this offseason. He talked about it. He didn't pitch a lot last year. He's like, he started long tossing earlier in the offseason. He's pitching for Team Italy in the WBC. That might not seem like a big deal, but I think in their minds, like that was, okay, this is going to get him going a little earlier, and that's okay. I mean, I think in the past, Nola was somebody who was like, I need to find a way to throw as many innings as I can every season. And I think the later stage now, Aaron Nola is more like, okay, like maybe I'm not going to throw 200 innings this year, but I could throw 180 innings that are slightly better than the 205 innings I might have thrown. So I think that's a fair trade-off, and it makes sense. So while low 90s doesn't sound great, I mean, I think for Aaron Nola, like low 90s in early March that's very different than what we've seen in the last few years. And so I think they're hoping that carries over to a better start. He gets a little bit of momentum going into the season as opposed to last year, which was, even before the injuries, was just, it wasn't right. It was not going well.
No, that seems encouraging overall. And the bullpen also looks like it's going to be a strength this year. If you just look at projected WAR across every team's bullpen, the Phillies are 4th. Only the Padres, Dodgers, and Rays are ahead of them. And those numbers are so close, you could probably shuffle them in any order. You could say the Phillies have the best bullpen in baseball on paper.
What a thing.
Would not be ridiculous. Yeah, like imagine telling someone that 5 or 6 years ago. Like, the Phillies are going to have the best bullpen in the league. It'd be preposterous. And I think part of the other, like, hey, but you should be excited about this team even though it looks so similar, is like they went out and got an elite reliever at the deadline last year. Instead of signing Edwin Diaz or signing Devin Williams, they traded for Joan Duran at the deadline last year. And they added Brad Keller, who looks a lot better as a short reliever. He looked great last year. That could be a huge addition. And then having Jose Alvarado eligible for the postseason this year, that changes the look of this team. Obviously, Orion Kerkering has always had interesting stuff, and the way his season ended and how he bounces back from that mentally is still, a question mark until we actually get there. But this is a bullpen that's deep and has a lot of high-quality arms, so I actually like this team. I feel like people are sleeping on them relative to the other contenders.
Philadelphia does not want to hear this, but yes, I mean the bullpen is definitely like it's amazing. I mean, if you go back and look at their opening day bullpen, and I know that's not what we're comparing them off of. You're looking at how they finished last year, but I mean, we're talking about Jordan Romano as the closer, right? Jose Ruiz was their third righty last year to start the season, and there's just more depth. I mean, there's just. Right now they have 2 open bullpen spots this spring, and we're not going to judge a team based on how they fill their bullpen, their 7th and 8th guy in the bullpen, but they have like a dozen legitimate guys who could win one of those jobs. And you're like, okay, I mean, the bar has been raised here. There's some actual competition. If they do suffer injuries or ineffectiveness, like they are able to backfill better this year than they were last year. When Romano and Ruiz were just flat out bad, they didn't really have any other options, and so they had to keep really pitching those guys for the first 2 months, and then Alvarado gets suspended, and the bullpen did hold it together mostly in the middle there, but it was shaky. And Duran, just a full year of Duran, I feel like I'm shouting to the clouds, but I mean, it's like that changes a lot. I mean, it changes so much. The Phillies haven't had a 30 save guy since Genmar Gomez in 2016, which is quite a thing. And so Duran, it's just going to allow them to have, I know it was very cool in Major League Baseball to have the role-less bullpen where, you're just going to use your leverage guys in the biggest spots. And it sounds great and it makes a lot of sense logically, but it's hard for relievers to not know when specifically they're pitching. And I think the Phillies are probably moving more toward the traditional structure of a bullpen, and that's Duran's going to have the 9th, Keller is mostly going to have the 8th, Alvarado's mostly going to have the 7th. Maybe there's some days where they flip Keller and Alvarado given the opposing lineup if there's a pocket of lefties, but the roles are very clearly defined. And I think that the relievers are really happy about that. And I think it's just deeper. Jonathan Bolin is a guy they got from Matt Strom in a trade with the Royals in the offseason. And Bolin is like, their 6th guy, and he's kind of interesting. Tanner Banks, like left on left last year, was one of the best left on left guys in baseball. He's like their 5th guy in the bullpen right now. I mean, I think they have more. Even this guy, Kyle Backus, they got in trade from the Diamondbacks in the offseason, was kind of like a minor move, and he added 15 pounds in the offseason and is throwing like 92, 93 this spring already, and is coming, throwing it basically from the ground because he's got this funky delivery. They just added, the bar is higher, and I think that will alleviate some of the pressure on the rotation because these Phillies teams the last few years, they really have been winning and winning and winning because of their rotation. And they have not been afraid to lean on those pitchers and rack up their inning counts and pitch counts. I think there will be times this year where they can ease back if they need to on some of their starters, and I think that will help overall.
And that might be very important in April in particular, with Painter breaking in, with Taijuan Walker definitely being part of the mix. Like, just going to that pen a little earlier might be a recipe for some success, relying on both of those guys. I'm still reeling from that Genmar Gomez recall because that season got deleted from my brain. Like, whatever brain cell was supposed to hold that knowledge, if one was supposed to hold that knowledge, long gone, decimated by some hazy IPAs or something else along the way. I mean, that was a bad season. That was a 4.85 ERA with 37 saves. Hard to do that, actually.
It's hard to do.
Yeah, that's rare. Now I'm going to go digging for the highest save total with the worst ERA. What the worst possible combo is. That's got to be up there as an all-time
Brad Lidge,
bad
2009 Brad Lidge has got to be close to that. Brad had like a 7+ ERA and had quite a few saves that year, I think.
We may have to do a non-Rockies division for this one, too, once we get the search up and running, because there's probably some Rockies closers that have ticked a few of those boxes.
Lidge had 31 saves with a 7.21 ERA.
Oh,
in 2009.
It is worse. You had it ready.
That might be it.
That might be the worst non-Colorado closer season of all time. That is rough. The Pacoda win total projection here, 85.5, and I mentioned this to Katie Wu earlier in the episode. We're getting a lot of heat for using too cold on these projections too often, but this one feels too cold to me, Matt. I hate to use it for maybe the 22nd time out of the 29 or so previews we've done, but I think the Phillies are probably an 88 or 89 win team.
I think that's right. I mean, I think I would have them somewhere between 88 and 90. I do think that, like, things could fall apart. I mean, they really could. I mean, like, if they do suffer an injury to the rotation, if Wheeler comes back and is not the Wheeler that we have come to know, things could fall apart. I mean, the rotation depth is not good. It's just simply not good. And they're going to try to add a couple depth pieces at the end of camp. You know, guys who take the release from other camps and go to AAA for them. They will add someone, but I mean, there's a lot of ways it can fall apart. It's an older team. I can totally see the tail to the negative here on this club. I think 85 is a little short. I tend to agree with you. I don't know. And we're recording this, you know, there's the Jerks and Profar news that dropped just a little while ago. He's possibly going to be suspended for the entire season for the Braves. Braves have had like a rough spring with injuries, and then you look at the Mets, like, I don't know. I mean, the Mets are better, but like, it's a weird division in that you see three teams like, okay, those three teams should be in the playoffs, but it's like, okay, are any of these three teams like great teams? And your answer is like, I don't know.
I just feel like our bar has been completely raised by the Dodgers having a projection that's so lofty, right? I mean, a 56.5 WAR projection for the Dodgers, and you get the Jays, Yankees, Mets, all between 48 and 47, and then it's like Mariners down to Braves. It's Mariners, Phillies, Red Sox, Orioles, Braves, all between 47 and 45 right now.
Yeah, some of the projection systems in the National League have 100 win team, the Dodgers, and like 90 win teams, and you're like, okay. So, I mean, there will be more than 190 win team, I think, in the National League.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
I think it's the unknowns of how harsh will the injuries and the attrition be on the teams that go under, right? Like, that's always the question. And then will some of the teams that are low projected teams rise more than expected? Like, will the Nats be a lot more competent than expected, throwing fewer four-seamers, being more aggressive on the base paths, maybe being just a better defensive team? Like, there's a lot of ways that teams like that could be more plucky than expected. I mean, the Marlins were kind of like that last year, and they had a lot of change too. So that's the part of this whole thing that's messy, is just not quite knowing where all those external forces are going to come to shift things around. I think those are three teams that have a similar number of questions atop the NL East. Like, there's a reason why they're projected the way they are. They're all very good teams, but you can pick nits in each of them. And Atlanta's injuries so far, even before that Profar news dropped, I think Spencer Schwellenbach's really important.
That's a huge injury. If you go in the Phillies clubhouse and ask them, you know, who are the best pitchers you faced last season, Schwellenbach is not number one, but I'm going to guarantee you, is in the top 3. He's so good against them, and they had a lot of trouble with him. And guys would always be commenting about how, like, this guy is just on a different level. So I had the Braves ahead of the Phillies going into spring. I probably still have them there, although I don't know. I think it's close. I think, like, the division winner has, like, 92-ish.
Yeah, well, seems like the right number. I'm buying it at the very least, Matt. Well, thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate all of your insight. Looking forward to catching up with you again later on this season. Really curious to see how some of these lingering questions about the Phillies are answered in the months ahead.
They are never not interesting.
That's a great way to put it. Matt Gelb, one of our great beat writers covering the Phillies here at The Athletic. We are going to go a couple reminders before I sign off. You can join the Discord. The conversation keeps going in there. Spring Eno back on the scene again tomorrow. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Thursday.